Clock says 1 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. How's everyone doing today? Good. All right, so today we're going to be talking about city directories. Just a reminder, if you've missed any of our past sessions, because we're on session 6 already, we have our YouTube channel. So there's a link to that playlist where it has all of our past sessions on our YouTube channel. So that's going to be on your handout on the last page. So feel free to go back and rewatch any of them if you need a refresher or if you missed any of them. If you need any of the handouts from the last sessions, you can definitely feel free to email me. My email address is on the handout. And I've got some Zoom hosts who are going to be sharing that link throughout our session. Or for those who are joining us in person, I've got a couple copies up here, or you would have gotten that email from Thompson Center with that handout link. So today we're going to be talking about city directories and a few other city directories or non-city directories that are similar to city directories. So does everybody kind of know what a city directory is? Have you used city directories or not really sure? Well, we're going to learn all about them today. So if you're not familiar with city directories, they are going to be a published listing of residents, of streets, of businesses, different organizations, and or institutions that are in a given area. So it's going to give their location or their address within that city or that town. They usually give an alphabetical listing of all the people, listing the heads of households, their address, and usually their occupation, which is really helpful to know for finding your ancestors. Some also include a wife's name, usually in parentheses or italics after that husband's name. But that usually isn't until after the 1920s, because of course, you know, at a certain time period, women's first names just didn't exist. They always went by their husband's name, unfortunately. But maybe you'll get lucky and see that wife's name in there. Some feature any working adult in the household. So you might get adult children, or maybe there's a brother of your ancestor who's living with them and, you know, works outside of the house. So you're going to get that address information, that occupation information for those people. Or sometimes if their adult child is going to school, you'll see that they're listed as a student, for example. So some also list those younger adults, regardless of if they're a student or if they're working. So these are published regularly, usually annually or biannually. So pretty much every year or every other year. It kind of depends on the publisher. Sometimes they might have skipped a year or 2 years, depending on the amount of staff they had or the budget that they had, or how big of a city that they're dealing with. Of course, during different war times, you know, a lot of things kind of shut down or slowed down. But usually after that mid-19th century, that's when we're going to more likely see them published every single year, which is really helpful. So they're typically for a specific geographic location, usually urban areas like a city or a county. Some communities, you know, that might have been a little bit smaller, they wouldn't publish their own directory, but they would be included in the next larger town or larger city directory. So for example, here in Appleton, we of course are a big enough city to have our own, but Little Chute, you know, just outside of Appleton, it's a little bit smaller of a community. They're not going to publish their own city directory or town directory. They're sometimes featured in the Appleton ones. So if you're looking for people outside of the Appleton area, sometimes they had Outagamie County directories where the whole county is represented in one given directory. So as I mentioned, you're going to usually get names, address, and occupations. That's usually the most common information that you're going to find in city directories. But of course, it's going to vary place to place, year to year, on some additional details that you might get outside of that basic information. So sometimes I've seen things like death dates listed in city directories for people who died since the last directory was published. Or sometimes if somebody moved, they will have a forwarding address where that person moved to. So now you can track where that ancestor family went after they left a certain city or an area. Or sometimes you can just get other different data things. Like I said, it's going to vary year to year and place to place. Of course, nothing is ever standard ever. Directories may also have sections that list streets and then all the inhabitants by house number. So you can see Mason Street and then see who's living at this house, who's living at the next house, and so on, which is really helpful to see what the neighbors are. You know, maybe a couple houses down is the brother-in-law or the father-in-law of one of your families. Or if you're looking at tracing the history of your house and seeing who lived in my house before me, that's really helpful to go to that street address part and then look up the different houses that way, and then keep going back into the directories to look them up that way, because usually you don't know who is living there before you. Some also include some extra content, usually in the front or the back of the directory. So you usually get like business listings or information on different civic and social and religious and charitable institutions that are in that area or in the surrounding areas. Sometimes you even get really cool photos of some of these places or different maps of the area that's represented in that directory. So definitely don't just skip to the alphabetical part or that street part. Be sure to look at the front and the back of the directories for all that kind of extra fun stuff. So here's an example of what a city directory looks like. So this is the 1945 San Francisco City Directory that I got on ancestry.com. So you can see there's, some ads listed for different businesses. So that's kind of cool if your ancestor owned a business, or you can see what kind of businesses were around where your ancestor was living. And then it's of course going to list a different name alphabetically. And then since this is a really popular surname, it's Hamilton. They have kind of a bunch of different pages of Hamiltons listed, but you can see right here is the name of the man. In parentheses is the name of the wife. It says he's a printer, and it says they live at 451 Bartlett. So now I can go look that address up and know that that's where they're living at that time. Some people are confused about city directories and they think, oh, city directories, they're just telephone books, or they use that phrase interchangeably, but city directories are not the same as telephone books. So both may be produced at the same time, so you might have a city directory and a telephone book. But the good thing about city directories is that your ancestors are going to be featured in there regardless of if they had a phone or not. And they go a lot further back than those telephone books. So for example, by the 1950s, about 2/3 of US households had a phone. Well, if your ancestors were in that percentage that didn't have a phone, then you might be out of luck finding them in a phone book, obviously, because you have to have a phone in order to be in the phone book. Whereas the city directories, it's going to list everybody regardless of if they had a phone or not. And for example, the earliest Appleton city directory we have is 1873. So that goes back pretty far. The telephone didn't come to Appleton until 1877. And we don't even have a phone book until 1950 at the library. And then there's a large gap where we don't have another phone book until 1974 because there kind of wasn't a need to have one. Not enough people had phones to justify having a phone book, apparently, or they just didn't keep them, unfortunately. And again, like I showed in our example, city directories also typically include more information than phone books. Usually in a phone book, you're just getting that name, that address, and that phone number, whereas in the city directory, you're also getting their occupation, which is really cool. So here's an example again of what a city directory looks like, and then I'm going to show you what a phone book looks like so you can see the difference. So this is a 1959 directory from Green Bay. So again, you see the person's name, in parentheses, you see the wife, you see his occupation, you even see what company he works for, and then you see where they live. And then again, you get that for all the people listed in that area. Whereas a phone book, so this is a phone book from 1954 in Chicago, you can see the names, the addresses, and then that phone number. It kind of has like a little fun abbreviation for some of these because some of them live in different areas of the city, or that's how phones were at that point. So you can see there's a big difference between information that you get in a city directory compared to a telephone book. Just quickly, I want to mention a brief history about city directories. So city directories actually date all the way back to 1785. So 1785 in Philadelphia was when the first one was published, and there were actually two different competing companies who published city directories. And then of course, many other big cities followed after that. So in those original, really early city directories were actually intended for businessmen because, hey, I need to find customers to sell to. So those early ones usually are only listing people who own property and people who were employed, which obviously excludes some women or most women, or they only feature those socially prominent citizens because those are the people that the businessmen want to target, right? But then those later directories, those are going to list all the heads of households with their spouses and those adult children, like we saw in the example. Then by the mid-19th century, that's when all major cities had a city directory. And then those rural communities or nearby cities sometimes were covered in those larger city directories, or they had directories that are titled by region, so by county, for example. Unfortunately, nowadays, some cities no longer publish city directories because it's really, really costly. If you've ever seen a physical city directory, they're pretty thick. You could use it as a doorstop. So some might only publish them on occasion, or some don't publish them at all, or maybe they've consolidated with other communities, for example. So now, for example, Appleton, whereas we used to have our own city directory for a really long time, now we're part of a larger Fox Cities city directory that thankfully is still published yearly. So we get like Neenah, Menasha in there, and then all the other smaller communities that are in this Fox Cities region. Telephone books, on the other hand, so the first phone book was published in 1878, shortly after Alexander Graham Bell made his first successful phone call. In that first phone book, it just listed 50 business subscribers. It didn't have addresses, it didn't have phone numbers for New Haven, Connecticut for some reason. But then as phone service increased, then phone books began to look more like what we see today. Though of course, now we don't really have many phone books because they're being printed less and less as more people shift to digital stuff, and more people don't have phone lines anymore. They have cell phones instead of those landlines. Thankfully, there are some resources. So what I usually do to try to find addresses or phone numbers for current people is I use white pages or A to Z databases, which is something that's free with your library card. So that's going to give you addresses and phone numbers if people still have a landline. But unfortunately, like I said, not many people still do, but you at least can get that address and then send them a letter and then ask them to give you a call, for example. So now we're going to go into the various types of directories. Of course, we're going to spend most of the time on city directories, but the first one, of course, is city directories. So again, that's going to list the residents of a particular location. Don't let that name fool you of being city directories, though, because they also include those smaller towns or those rural areas in some cases. Or like I mentioned earlier, it could be a county directory. Again, by mid-19th century, those often include that supplemental information like government stuff, those street guides, those lists of churches, those clubs, those organizations, and those categorized lists of businesses that are really helpful in trying to understand the community where your ancestor lived, where they worked, where they volunteered, or participated in, religious services, where they went to school, things like that. Again, they may have an alphabetical listing of all the residences, and then that street guide where it's going to be street by street, who's living on what street. Thankfully, city directories don't just exist for the United States, so those are the ones we're mostly going to focus on for our examples today, but they do have some many international countries. So the earliest I was able to find online is London in 1595. So if your international ancestors lived, outside of the United States, then you might be able to find a city directory in that area for them. One really great plus of city directories is that they're typeset. So it makes them really easy to be able to read them. They're not handwritten like a lot of these other documents that we've been looking at this whole time. So you're a lot, more likely to be able to read them than if you have, difficulty reading an occupation on a census, for example. Then you can look up in the city directory and see, okay, it says he's a printer. Well, maybe that's what it says in the census then. And then you can kind of see the handwriting and make out if it's, the same occupation or if it's a different occupation. Those directories sometimes list things in different order, kind of depends again, year to year, place to place. But the most common order of listing information is going to be that name of that person, their occupation, and their address. Or sometimes you get that name, then the address, then your occupation. So sometimes it's kind of flip-flopped. So now I'm going to show you how to pull up a city directory on ancestry.com. So it's going to work the same way as you're doing the library edition. It's just going to look a smidge different, but since we're not in the library, I can't show you the library edition. But if you have an Ancestry subscription, you're just going to sign into your Ancestry subscription. You're going to come up here to click on search, and you can click on all collections. Something new that Ancestry has been doing, if you have recently looked at any of these types of collections, it's going to give you that right up here. So it's really helpful. Hey, I just looked at a city directory, let me go back in. But let's pretend it's not there so I can show you how to find it if it's not right up there for you. So if you scroll down over here on the right-hand side, you see a couple bolded categories and then subcategories underneath there. Well, there's a category down here that says schools, directories, and church histories. So that first one right under there is city and area directories. So that's what you're going to want to click on to get into all of these directory types. So right here, you could just do that name search if you wanted to, or what I usually like to do is I like to just click into the collection. So for example, there's one for US city directories from 1822 to 1995. So a really large, broad category. So that's usually what I click in. Again, you can start doing that search here if you know you're searching for specific people. Or what I like to do is I like to browse. So you can see over here on the right-hand side, you can choose what state you want to look at. So for example, we can go down to Wisconsin, and then you can choose a specific city or county. And you can see Appleton's listed right here at the top because it's alphabetical. And then you can click on what year. So you can see all these various years that are digitized here on Ancestry. Of course, it doesn't have every single year that is ever published, but it's got a little bit of coverage, especially those historic ones. So for example, let's pick the 1951 one. And then right down here, it's going to give you that title where you can just click in. So now I'm in that directory. I can use some of these tools over here on the right-hand side to zoom in, zoom out. If I want to, I can move around. Now you can see, instead of Appleton, it's actually an Allegheny County one where it includes combined Fox, Kaukauna, Kimberly, and Little Chute. So if you're looking for those ancestors in Kimberly and you don't see Kimberly listed on one of the here, which they do have it listed, but maybe they didn't list 1951, I would always check that larger city that's kind of close to that smaller city or smaller town that you're looking for. So now you can kind of go page to page if you would like to. Usually towards the front, they have an index so you can see. They have a listing of churches, of city officials, a buyer's guide. The alphabetical directory starts on page 233. So you can see this is a pretty large directory. One thing that's really important to pay attention to, though, is, of course, you see this is scanned as 2 pages at a time. So if you look down here, it says there's only 461 pages. Well, it's probably double that because they're scanning it 2 pages at a time. So what I usually do is I might put like 150 in here, and then I go to the page 150 and I'll see where I'm at. So I see I'm in the F's. If I'm looking for somebody who has a last name that starts with a C, I know I need to go back a little bit in order to find them. So I kind of just like pick a random number and then type that in and then see how close I am. So now I'm in the A's, for example. Or you could, of course, go page to page if you want to just browse through it. Like I mentioned, there's lots of really great content at the beginning or at the end sometimes. So you can see that stuff represented there. Once you find your ancestors in here, of course, you can look and see what information they have in here. Sometimes they have the woman's name and that she's a widow of so-and-so. So that's really helpful information that they give in here. Sometimes you'll see businesses listed in these alphabetical areas, or they might have a separate business listing elsewhere in the directory. But once you find a page that you want to save, all you have to do is come up here to that upper right corner where it says save, and then you can save it to a person in your tree if you have an Ancestry account, or save it to your computer and then be able to download or print a copy of this page. So again, they have all the United States in here. Every single state is represented in here except for Alaska. Unfortunately, I don't know why they don't have any Alaska ones, but they at least have some coverage of every other state in the United States. including DC. Again, coverage is going to vary. They don't have every single one ever published, but this is a really large collection where it has various years for various cities. So hopefully you get lucky and find an area where your ancestor lived and a time period where your ancestor lived in here, of course. Or, like I said, instead of going into that browse area, what you can do is you can type in the name of your ancestor. So I'm going to type in Ralph Hamilton. And I know they lived in San Francisco, California. And I can go ahead and click search and see if I'm able to find any results. So now I can click on here. If you click right over here where it says view image, that'll bring you right into the image. And now I can see where he is in here. So kind of have to hunt around a smidge to see if you're able to find them. So now I can see right down here, here's my great-grandparents and where they're living and what my great-grandfather is doing at that time. And so that's an easy way, again, to find your ancestors instead of having to go year to year. But sometimes that kind of keyword search doesn't always work 100% of the time. So I always recommend doing both. Any questions about searching in here or using this collection on Ancestry? It also works this way on Heritage Quest, which I'll show you a little later.
Do all the directories have something that tells you what Concord means, you know, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so a lot of those abbreviations and stuff, sometimes in the beginning of the directory, sometimes those first few pages, or there's like a little spot, sometimes in the beginning of that alphabetical listing where it will say what it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those abbreviations later and give you some resources as well. Because yeah, off the top of my head, I'm not sure what that means, what comp means. But R usually stands for resides or residence. So I know Concord is an area right outside of San Francisco. So they're not technically living in the city, but they're living in one of those like suburbs. And you can see Western Envelope is the company that he would work at, for example. Or you can see sometimes they have like buyer or apartment number, or you can see like H, so that stands for a house. You know, of course, some of these you can make out like this WHSEMN, that's probably, yeah, probably like a warehouseman or something like that. EMP, that's employee, AGT, that's an agent. I mean, some of them it's kind of like you have to, you know, think for a minute, but there are some listings where you can find some of those abbreviations. Or like I said, you might be able to go, this one's like 1,200 pages, so I don't think we can quickly find sometimes you can look at these little clippings down here and see if you're able to find quickly if there's a key to all of those, but I don't want to waste everybody's time trying to find it. But usually if you play around in some of those pages, most directories will have kind of a key to some of those common used ones.
Are the directories on family first or mother?
So we'll cover that in a little bit. But this one, I feel like it's easiest to use on Ancestry. And this is just a really large collection on Ancestry as well, because it covers 1822 to 1995, and then every state except for Alaska is covered in here, at least some coverage. So this is probably one of the #1 spots I go to when I'm searching for a city directory. Like I said, you can still do this also on Ancestry Library Edition. So if you don't have a personal subscription to Ancestry, you just got to come into the library and you can pull up Ancestry Library Edition. Once you get to that main homepage, if you scroll down all the way to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a spot that says City Directories. So there's kind of these quick links down here. That's where you're going to want to click in, and then it will be the same where you can do that keyword search for that ancestor's name or do the browsing like I showed you, where you pick the state, you pick the city, you pick the year. So either way would work. There's 1,300 collections of city directories or related directories for the United States, for UK, Canada, Poland, Germany, Iceland, and Australia. So again, there are some international collections on here, and you don't have to have that world subscription to ancestry.com then. Because I just have a basic US one. So if I wanted to, for example, look for my German ancestors and see if there was any directories for them, I would come into the library and use it instead of upgrading my subscription. Any questions from our online folks so far, or anybody else got questions here? Let's see. Peoria, Illinois. Yes, I have ancestors in Peoria. Do you know when Peoria stopped printing a directory? I do not know when they stopped printing a directory, but I do know that they have directories for Peoria on ancestry.com. Can you find an address? Can you find rural residents? Sometimes, so sometimes you get those county directories. Usually you're not going to get an actual address though for those rural residents. It might just list like, hey, they live in Shiocton, which is a rural area of Outagamie County. It's not going to give you their street. It might say what route they're on for like postal deliveries and stuff like that. But unfortunately, those rural areas, they usually don't have an address in those city directories. It's more those urban kind of areas like cities and towns and not those rural areas, unfortunately.
What about the fire lane number?
I've not come across any that have fire lane numbers, but it depends again, year to year or place to place, what's going to be included in those rural listings. And then Angie shared in the chat for those virtual folks, there's genealogyintime.com. They have a list of city directory abbreviations. So that's also in your handout, I know, as well. But I'll cover that in a little bit later once we get to that part. All right, so our next type of directory is going to be the street address directories. So sometimes you might see these called crisscross directories. Usually like those international ones kind of call them a crisscross directory, which is kind of a funny term for me, but they also call them sometimes house directories. So those are kind of similar to those city directories. But again, like I mentioned, there's a spot within city directories where you have that street and then each house is listed and who's living in the house. So it's essentially a street guide that you might find in a city directory, or sometimes if it's a really larger city or a certain area, they might just print those street address guides and not a typical alphabetical city directory. So it gives you a really great picture of each household, letting you see who's living in that household or who's living near each other, who the neighbors are a little bit more easily. These are going to be a little bit more limited in city directories, so I don't see as many digitized, or I don't see as many in the libraries, for example. They're mostly going to be larger cities and towns that had them, or again, they might be a part of a city directory, usually in the front or in the back after those alphabetical listings is where you're going to find those areas. And again, it's a really great tool for researching your house history because you can go right to your street, right to your house number, and then see who's living there and do that year to year for all the directories that you want to. So here's an example of what looks like. Click in so you can see what it looks like. So I found this on Internet Archive, and I'll show you a little bit later how to use this site to pull up city directories. But this one's for the Oakland, California area. And so you can see, you zoom in here. You can see Maple Ave right here, and then it's got a house number, and now you can see all the names that are listed here. And it's also cool that it gives you cross streets. So if you're looking at a regular map then, or you want to plug in an address in Google Maps, for example, to see where this is, now you can see all the different cross streets that are there as well, and be able to better orient yourself of where it is. So again, just a really easy way to find that street name or that drive or Ave or whatever it is, and then find that house number and then see who's living there. So sometimes you get more than one name listed. So that's usually maybe people who are related, or people who are unrelated sometimes are listed there as well. If your ancestor had a boarder, for example, or somebody renting a room in their house, they might be listed there as well. Our next type is going to be business directories. So of course, like the name implies, it's going to list businesses only. So you might still find business directories within city directories, but they might have also printed separate business directories, kind of thinking of our current yellow pages. Obviously, they don't really print yellow pages anymore, it seems. That's another thing that's gone pretty much all digital, but this is just businesses. So you have different categories of businesses, and then all the business names and the contact information for those businesses. Again, they're usually arranged alphabetically, but sometimes they also list them by that business type, or you might get both. So it might be jewelry manufacturing and auto dealers all listed alphabetically by what type of business it is, and then all the listings would be alphabetical underneath. Of course, not available for all locations and all time periods. It's going to really depend on how large that community is and if they felt the need to publish a separate one or if they featured that in their city directories. And of course, it may not also be all inclusive. It might not list all of those businesses that are in that area because not all companies participated in the publication of it. So sometimes they might have had to pay to be featured in some of these listings. So if they didn't want to pay to be in it, they weren't featured in it, for example. So here's an example of the 1901 Outagamie County Directory that has the business directory section within it. So you can see there's different cooper shops, there's different creameries, there's dentists, there's egg dealers, there's furniture. So you can see all the various categories, and then within those categories, all the listings of that company name and then where it's located in the area. And some of these are cool where it says CADVT, so C advertisement. That means somewhere within this directory, there's going to be an advertisement for that company, which is really great if it's your ancestor who owns that company or who's working for that company. Then you can look and see there's directory advertisement in here. So you can see usually on every page, there's going to be at least a few directory advertisements on all these pages, or at the beginning, at the end of all these, because of course, that's how these directories are making money, by selling advertisements, because they know this is going out to people and people are going to see this advertisement. It's a way to market my business. There's also sometimes really great indexes. So I found this one of a Nashville business directory on Internet Archive, where you can see all the various information that's included in here. So you can see like there's a historical sketch of the city, there's mortuary statistics, there's the health of the city, there's information on the public school system, on the university, on the medical department. There's, you know, all these kinds of different various things that they would have in this city directory or this business directory, where I can then go to that page and learn more about the flouring mills, for example, if I wanted to. So that's one of the first things I usually check in a directory, is the index, to see what kind of great additional information they might have in this directory besides a business listing or besides a resident listing. The next one is going to be trade and professional directories. So again, this is really similar to those business directories, but it's only going to cover a single category of a business. So it might be the entire county, it might be an entire state, or even the whole country is going to be a part of this trade or professional directory. And it's going to list those prominent professionals and those tradespeople, usually like railway workers might have a separate one, or you see like a doctor's one or a lawyer's one, where all the different lawyers all around the state of Wisconsin might be listed in this one directory, or maybe there's a directory for all of the doctors in all the United States. If you have farming ancestors, they also made farm directories, which were really popular in the 20th century. So with any luck, you might have a farm directory in that area where your ancestors would have had their farm. Again, in the online collections, sometimes these are called various different things depending on what they feature. So sometimes you might see it under doctor's directory or lawyer's directory, or you might see it called a register or a ledger or an index or employment records. So all these various titles might be under this broader term of these trade and professional directories. So kind of use a couple different words when you're searching for these in some of the sites. So here, for example, is a farm directory that I found in Boone County, Indiana for 1920 that I found on Internet Archive. So like you had asked earlier about the abbreviations, this one right here at the top has abbreviations that are used in this directory, where you can see CH means children, O means owner, T means tenant, and et cetera, et cetera. So this one's really great in that it gives a lot of information about this particular farm. So you can see in the example, it's giving the name of that person, In parentheses, you're getting the name of the wife, including her maiden name, which is awesome. You're getting the name of the children. You're getting where they live, of course, not an exact address because again, this is a rural area, of course, but it's giving you a section number and a town number that you can then pull up a plat map for that area and then see where within that plat that area is going to be, and then have a little bit narrower of a place to focus in that area of where they would have lived. So again, lots of really great information. Sometimes they even have like, if there's a farm name, that it has a specific name for it. You can see what the post office is, what the township is, how many acres there are, things like that. Lots of great information if you can find one of these farmers directories. Here's an example of a medical directory that I found for Ireland in the Ancestry Library edition. So again, you get things like their name, what county they are, where he got his medical degree, what different hospitals and what time periods he would have worked there, and all that kinds of fun information that would be really great information to know about your ancestor and about their education and where they worked, for example. Our next one is going to be telephone directories. So we talked a little bit about this, how telephone directories are not the same as city directories. But again, this is going to be an alphabetical listing for all the names of people who have a telephone with their address and with their phone number. Again, for your ancestor to appear in a telephone directory, they had to have a phone at that time. So if they didn't have a phone, they wouldn't be in there. You'd hopefully find them in the city directory. Most cities at certain times had both a city directory and a telephone directory. Until phone service became a little bit more common, then sometimes you'll see those phone directories kind of replacing city directories in some areas, usually around that mid-20th century. But some places still do print both, or may have just gone back to printing a city directory only now. So I haven't seen a physical telephone directory in quite a few years for our area, for example, but we still do print those city directories. And of course, you know, now that people usually have cell phones instead of landlines, they usually aren't printing those telephone directories any longer, or you're not going to find them in online listings until they develop some sort of online listing of cell phone numbers, which hopefully they never will, and then we won't get all those scam calls anymore. So here's an example of the 1950 Appleton telephone directory that I found in the library, because I haven't found any of them digitized online at this point. But again, you can see it's alphabetical. It's got that name of that person, their address, and then their phone number. And at that time, phone numbers were, you know, 1 digit and then 4 digits long, not the, you know, typical area code and then regular phone number that we're used to seeing nowadays. There's a couple other miscellaneous types of directories. So sometimes you might get alumni directories for certain schools or colleges. You might get church directories of all the people that were members of a certain church. Yearbooks. Most people don't think of yearbooks as a directory, but they are listed under the directory category in ancestry.com. Of course, you know, that's a directory. It's got names of people. It's got photos of people, which is really great. And then, of course, there's lots of other various different directories that there might be internationally or in the United States. So here's an example of an alumni directory I found from Harvard from 1919 that's on Internet Archive. So again, you've got an alphabetical listing of all the people who were students there, where they're currently living, usually when they graduated, what their degree was, for example, information like that. So again, some helpful stuff that you can find if your ancestor went on to a school and they printed her directory, for example. Questions so far about the other various types of directories we've covered? And I'll show you how to find them, or show you a couple other helpful tips and things. See if we got any online questions here. If somebody's wondering if names could be misspelled in city directories, yes, unfortunately, just like anything else, names can be misspelled. I've found lots of creative spellings for my person's name. So you always want to definitely, double check various name spellings. That's why sometimes I just browse. Like if I know I'm looking for somebody with a K surname, I might look through all the different Ks just to make sure if I don't see them under the traditional spelling that I know, I want to double check and make sure I've looked through all the Ks to make sure that they aren't accidentally misspelled somehow. Even with being typeset, you will still get misspellings. So you might be wondering what kind of information you might be able to find on your ancestor in a city directory or a different type of directory. So again, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to depend on the various time period, the places, what type of directory it is. But generally, you're going to find your ancestor's name, that address, that occupation. Sometimes you might get an employer name and an employer address. Sometimes you might get their marital status, or you can infer that information like I showed you earlier. Sometimes you get that wife's name in parentheses or in quotation marks after it. Or like we saw earlier in one of our examples, it had the woman's name and then in parentheses that she was the widow of Carl, for example. So now you know what her marital status is. She's a widow. Sometimes it'll also differentiate in those directories if they owned their residence or if they were just renting it or they were a tenant of that area. So again, it's going to vary completely. You're never going to find ones that are consistent all around. So, but this is kind of the basic information that you're hoping to find, and maybe you get lucky and find some additional information in addition to this stuff. So here are some of those miscellaneous abbreviations that we talked about. So usually you can look at the beginning or like we saw in that farm directory, it had some of those abbreviations, but some of the really common ones are BBS or BDS I've seen is boards. That means, kind of renting there. Or RMS means they're rooming there or like renting. WID for widow, STU for students. You might also see abbreviations, of course, for first names. So there's a link in your handout for more abbreviations, but some of those basic ones that you can kind of figure out, like WM for William. But of course, in that link, if you scroll down here, it's got pretty much every name you can think of. So you might have to scroll through some ads and stuff, but now you can see alphabetically all the different various abbreviations and what they might stand for. So you might have, AND for Andrew or ANDW for Andrew, for example, and then you can kind of scroll through and see what that name might possibly be. Again, there's lots of abbreviations for the various occupations, and some are going to vary depending on that different directory. Some of them you might be able to make out or you might have to think about. Some of them are a little bit harder, like, harness maker. Okay, well, that's not an occupation that we think of nowadays. So for you to have to think of harness maker, that might be a little bit more difficult. You might be able to figure out abbreviation-wise what it might be. Or again, look at the beginning of that directory or the beginning of the alphabetical listing. Sometimes they have a key to those abbreviations. There's also a link for your handout where it has some of these common abbreviations. So you can, again, scroll down here and see what some of these mean, like AGT means agent, or auto means automobile, or association, or chambers, or civic, or college, or department. I mean, some of these obviously are really, easy to figure out, but some of them are a little bit harder. Lodging, lumber, merchant, manufacturing, all kinds of different various abbreviations that you might find in those directories. Let's see if they have computer or whatever it was, COMP. Yeah, they don't. They have commissioner commons. I don't know what COMP means. I mean, I know he was a printer, so I don't know if that was what they used for printer or if he was doing something else at that time when we looked at that directory. But again, I always would trust the directory first and see if they have a key to those abbreviations, because that's going to be the most accurate. Or you could, search around some more for some common abbreviations or kind of crowdsource. Like there's lots of really great genealogy Facebook groups. If you can't figure out what an abbreviation is, try asking a group of genealogists and you get a couple different answers maybe, or maybe they're all agree on one answer and it'll be an obvious one maybe. You might be wondering where the information in these directories comes from. So remember that these are published yearly or every other year usually, but the information that they're collecting and putting in these directories is sometimes or usually collected up to a year in advance because they have to typeset all of this. This is really, time consuming to typeset everything. So they need to collect all the information and get it all laid out and get it sent to the printer before they can have those physical copies to the people. So for example, the 1905 directory, it might have, been they're collecting that information in 1904. Well, maybe your ancestors moved between the time they collected that information and the time they actually published it, but hopefully not. Sometimes in the beginning of the directories, they sometimes include how they collected their information or when that information was collected. So sometimes if you look at that title page or one of those first few pages, you might get some additional information on that specific directory. But much like the census, like we talked a couple months ago about the census, they had information collectors that were employed by the various publishers of these directories. They would go door to door to canvass the whole entire city or the whole entire town, or obviously there'd be certain people assigned to certain areas, kind of like a different census enumerator was assigned to different parts of the city. So they would do that for some of those earlier directories, but later on they would mail different cards requesting any updates from that household to be sent for that next edition that they would be publishing. Unfortunately, just like the census, we don't know who's providing that information. So is it the husband? Is it the wife? Is it a neighbor? Is it some other adult who's living in the house? We have no clue. So just like anything else, you're going to want to take that information that you find in these directories and verify it with other resources to confirm that that is accurate information. It's also important to note that city directories are really geared towards libraries, towards businesses, those chamber of commerce and other types of things like that. It's not really geared towards people like you would think, hey, I have a phone book in my house because I'm going to call people. Well, city directories are, because they're so expensive to produce, it's really not something our ancestors could easily just buy or would have on hand, unless they were like a businessman who was like using it to generate sales or find people to contact. So some were like hundreds of dollars to buy. Sometimes on that first page or one of the first few pages, it might list how much it was to purchase it. But remember, you got to think of inflation and all that stuff. So for example, in our Appleton 1915 city directory, it says it was $5 to buy. Well, $5, I could pull $5 out of my pocket right now, not a big deal. But if you calculate $5 in today's dollars, it's actually $151. So I'm not just going to plunk out $150 for a book. That's a lot of money to expect for a book that's only good for a year, essentially. And if you're curious about how to calculate those kind of dollars in today's terms, there's a site called dollartimes.com where you can plunk in that information, select what year that $5 was from or whatever, and then it'll calculate it for you. So that's how I figured out $5 in 1915 times is $151.85 in today's dollars. Of course, those larger cities, they cost a lot more for those city directories than just $5. Like $5 for Appleton was probably considered cheap. I've seen some that were like $100 in that time period. Now it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars in today's time. Sometimes they also sold these on a subscription basis. So like a magazine subscription, you would pay for a yearly subscription to get the latest update, for example. Again, these are really thick books. They're sometimes hundreds or even thousands of pages. So it's really not cheap to print. That's why, of course, they had to charge so much. Or again, they were trying to make money off advertising. So that's how they could sometimes lessen that cost of printing and really make their money. I've also heard sometimes of publishers at various times putting fake names in the directories because sometimes there's competing publishers trying to publish a directory, and they wanted to make sure this competing publisher isn't just copying our stuff and not going out and getting the information themselves. So they would put that fake information in there to say, hey, you copied this fake name, you're in trouble now. So I've heard of that. I've not, confirmed that that's something I've never seen before. Obviously, I wouldn't know if it's a fake name or not, but just be aware of that. And then again, just like any other genealogy source, you want to verify that information that you're finding these directories with other sources, of course. Now I've got some helpful tips for you. So usually when you're searching for an ancestor, I always start with the last known year that I know that they will be featured there, and I work backward in time. So if I know that they lived in Appleton until 1952, I might go find the 1952 directory or 1951 or 1950, whatever year we have. That's going to be the last one that they're going to be featured in. And then I go to 1949, then 1948, 47, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that important? Because sometimes streets were renamed, sometimes they were renumbered. So it can make it appear like your ancestor moved when actually they didn't. Their house was just renumbered or their street name might have changed. So for example, Appleton, we changed our street numbers and some names in 1925. So if you pull up the 1925 Appleton directory, you can actually see what the old address was pre-1925 and then what the new address is or what the current address is. So that's really helpful if you are just going based off what the old address was or what the new address was and your ancestor lived there before that time of when that switch happened, you're going to be looking at the wrong house data then, unfortunately. So something very important to know is if an area renumbered or renamed certain things. Of course, that change might not have happened when your ancestor lived there. So you might not realize that address from 1920, for example, is not the same address as today, for example. If people rented, it is possible that they move to another address, sometimes on the same street or within the same neighborhood every year or two. Of course, they did this, of course, cheaper rent. They wanted a bigger place or a smaller place, or they wanted to live closer to their workplace or to their family, just like any of us would think about moving if we were renting a place. Put yourself in our ancestors' shoes and understand maybe that's why they were moving around a bit within a city or an area. Some of the really early directories sometimes might not give you an exact address. You kind of got to do some thinking on it. So for example, this 1887-88 directory of Appleton, one of the listings says this person resides on the east side or ES of Union Street, 1S or 1 south of Washington Street. So you kind of have to figure out the code and again, use some of those common abbreviations to see what their address is or try to figure out where on a map this address is. They've got some really great resources called Sanborn insurance maps to see where a house is. So if you have something like this where it says east side of Union Street, 1 south of Washington, I would pull up a Sanborn map from this time period and try to figure out if I can see what the address is and then use that or look at the next directory after this. Maybe they actually have that numerical address and not just this east side, 1 south of stuff. So one really great resource for Sanborn insurance maps is going to be the Library of Congress website. We of course have some physical ones at the library as well, but this Library of Congress site has a bunch of different years for a bunch of different locations. So when you come to this site, there's a link in your handout. You can either narrow down by date, or what I usually do is I narrow it down by the state first. So it's going to give you all these different various states. You find what state you want. So if I'm looking for Wisconsin, I'm going to click on Wisconsin. And then over here on the left-hand side, then it's going to narrow it down by county. So if I'm looking for Outagamie County, that's what I want to click on. And then I can even narrow it down further by various cities. So not every single city had one, but most of the major cities or towns had one, or a few throughout the year. So I want to narrow down to Appleton. And then this was what year? 1887, 88. So now I'm going to look at the years. We've got an 1883 one. We've got an 1886 one. We've got an 1891. So I might pull up this 1886 one because that's about a year or so before this directory was created. And then you can pull up the actual map. So the first page usually is going to give you like that legend or that key of what various streets are there. And it'll show you a cool little map where you can see what number that street is going to be featured on or what part of the map. Or again, they're going to have these street listings here. So I'm looking for Union Street, which is not listed here. But the other street was Washington. Oh, it's looking like it's actually listing, this one's listing businesses, it looks like. There we go. Over here is where they list the street. So sometimes it's confusing. So here we've got Union Street. So it's going to be on page 9 over here, it shows. So now I want to go to page 9. And just like our city directories, sometimes the numbers on the page won't match the number that it is up here. So you got to just double check that I'm on the right page. I am on page 9. And now I can see Union Street's right here and Washington Street's right here. So now I can figure out north, east, south, west. I'm looking on the east side, 1 south of Washington Street. So I'm thinking this is the house I'm looking at right here. So again, you gotta kind of figure it out, look at a map, and then figure it out that way of where they're actually talking about. Does that make sense? And then you can see right here is an actual number of that house location. There's lots of other cool things with these insurance maps. So like a certain color or all these various markings, what those mean. I would go back to these first pages and it will tell you on these pages what the various things mean. So sometimes it's on that first page, sometimes it's on the second page. Sometimes it doesn't list it. Here it is, it's down here. So it'll say yellow means it's a frame house, red means it's brick, blue means it's stone, etc., etc. What all these various markings mean. So always look for that key in the directory or in the map to tell you, because sometimes they might have changed the various little markings or the different colors and what they mean year to year. So you want to make sure the one that you're looking at is the right one and what you're trying to figure out is the right stuff. So they use these to figure out how much to charge people, because of course, if you have a frame building and you're right next to a place that like burns a bunch of stuff, you're going to get higher taxed or higher insurance because it's more likely your frame house is going to be burned in a fire. Unless it's like a brick house, then you're not going to get charged as much because that's less likely to be lost to fire, for example. You might notice in some directories they have names in all bold or in all capital letters, like this example right here. You see August Smith and Charles Smith are listed in bold. That's because they, either the company or that person, paid a special fee to have their name stand out. Maybe they were somebody really prominent. Like this guy, he's the president of the First National Bank. So he's like, hey, I want people to know who I am. Or this guy, he is the owner of the Waverly House. So he wants people to know who I am and what my business is and stuff like that. So they would have paid a little extra to be featured prominently, for example. Don't ignore that table of contents or that index that you might find at the beginning of those directories, because again, you might be missing some valuable information. So maybe there's a spot that says late additions or removals. That's going to be talking about who was added or who left the city. Or sometimes where they were from or where they went. If it was a little too late to, fix all the typeset for that page that they would have been featured in, they're not going to go through all that time. They're just going to add an additional page with those late additions or those removals, for example. So you might see something like this. In the 1945 San Francisco directory, you see alterations, additions, etc., that were received too late for regular insertion. So maybe you're going through the alphabetical listing and you don't find your ancestor. Well, I would want to come and check this part because maybe they were added later after most of the information was collected and it was too late to go redo that page, that they just added them in this specific page. So always be sure to check that. After you find your ancestor in that alphabetical listing, I always go to the street guide part. So again, it's listing those streets and then the various house numbers. If it's a part of that directory or if they have a separate street directory. And I see who else might be living in that house. Maybe even a person who didn't have the same last name, because hey, maybe it's a widowed daughter, or, oh, maybe it's just a boarder who, was renting a room. Or maybe it's somebody who, oh, I keep seeing this name as a witness on, some of these other genealogy records. And then you can find out kind of who this person is and try to make sense of how your ancestor would have known them. Again, you can pull up a map of this area and the street guide, and I always look at all the neighboring streets around this area. So I check the street guides for those to see, hey, are there possible relatives living nearby? Or where's the closest school that my ancestor might have went to because they lived in this vicinity? Or what was the closest church where maybe my ancestor attended? And then you've got to go follow up and see, hey, does that church still exist? Can I get those church records? Or can I figure out for sure if my ancestor went to that school with some school records? Things like that. So using these street guides and some other helpful resources, you can kind of try to start piecing together the puzzle of trying to figure it out. Be aware sometimes if a widow was listed as an address and then the next year she's not, maybe there's a man listed there instead of her. Maybe they have her name in parentheses. Well, she might have remarried. So you want to be sure then to check those marriage records because she could have remarried. Also be aware, sometimes they might list a widow as a widow when she was actually divorced. So they did this sometimes to save face and said, oh, I'm a widow, even though they divorced and maybe he moved out of the area. So nobody knew for sure that he didn't die. But again, that might be something that's a possibility. If you can't find that death record for that person and it says she's a widow, look for divorce records because maybe that's why she's listed as a widow and when she's really not a widow. You could locate some advertisements for a business your ancestor owned or worked for. So again, lots of ads in those directories. It's how they made that money. Even if your ancestor didn't own or work for a business, you can see what businesses would have existed in their community that they probably would have, went to, and that's where they bought their meat, or that's where they went and got their clothes. You can really use the supplemental information to kind of paint a picture of what the community looks like and who they're interacting with. You could also use some of that supplemental information in the front of the directories to find out what social clubs or what civic clubs or church organizations they might have been a part of, and figure out, do records exist for those clubs so I can figure out what my ancestor did within that organization. Our next Find Your Ancestors, which happens on July 11th, is going to be all about researching those social and civic club records. So if you know your ancestor was a part of a certain club or volunteered for some certain organization, and you want to learn more about how to research those types of records and see if records exist for that specific one, definitely mark your calendars for July 11th. And if you can't make it, we are recording that and we'll post it on our YouTube channel. There's a link in your handout to register for that program as well. Someone had asked earlier about rural listings. So sometimes when we're talking about people who lived in rural areas, they might give an acreage amount of how many acres your ancestor owned. And sometimes they might even list a property value for that property. Of course, you're not going to get that actual permanent address in most cases, but this is still some great information for you if you have ancestors who aren't living in one of those larger cities. Questions so far?
Yeah, on those Sanborn maps, my ancestry is a small rural town in Iowa, and for the past 100 years, I found 2 Sanborn maps. Do they do those with more regularity than, once every 50 years, or does it depend on the city? Or
yeah, for Sanborn maps, publishing those, sometimes it's every few years, sometimes it's not for a long time. It really depends on the community and how much the community is changing. Because of course, like I mentioned, what they were used for, it's to determine how much insurance or how much to charge you for that given area. Well, if the community is, really rapidly changing and lots of things are being built, of course, they're going to do them more frequently because they want to give you the most accurate charge for what your insurance is going to be. Whereas if it's a community that hasn't changed a whole ton in 50 years, maybe they're not doing them as often, or it might be the case that that's all that's online and that there's more offline. So for example, the Appleton ones, I think there's like 4 or 5 listed. We have an additional one at the library that I've not been able to find online digitized at all. So it's possible that the local libraries in that area would have additional years that you would want to contact them. Let's see, what was the source for info in city directories? I don't know what you mean by the source for information in city directories. You could clarify what your question is. I'm happy to try to answer it, or check the handout. Usually any source I mention is in the handout. All right, so now you guys are probably wondering, well, where do I find these? Obviously, I showed you Ancestry and how you can find them on Ancestry Library Edition or on the paid subscription, but there's lots of other places that you can find directories, because of course, not all of them are online or not all of them are on Ancestry. One really great tool to find out if a directory exists for a specific time in a specific location that you're looking for is to check your local library. And I have to say that as a librarian, but it's true. Even if I wasn't a librarian, I would tell you the local library is the #1 spot to go, because they're going to have all the stuff that's not digitized at this point, or stuff that is digitized and that they still have that physical copy in the library. If you're not familiar with what the name of the library is or where the library is in a given area where you're searching, where your ancestors lived, use Google to try to get that local library in a specific area. Always be sure to check those nearby cities or those towns, because maybe they're included in that bigger city directory. Like I mentioned, Kimberly and Little Chute, which are smaller communities right here outside of Appleton, they're often featured in our Appleton city directory. Sometimes we even have Neenah and Menasha, which are smaller communities around us, or sometimes Neenah and Menasha had their own city directories, and then Appleton had their own city directories. It really varies. And then again, those rural areas like Shiocton, Black Creek, Freedom, they sometimes aren't included in our Appleton city directory, but if we had a county directory that year, then we're going to have them listed. So for 1910, for example, that's a county directory. It's going to have Appleton, it's going to have all the various little cities and towns, and it's going to have all those rural areas, like Black Creek, like Shiocton, and give you that various information. If you do find a library and you see they might have multiple branches, I always am looking for what's called the main branch or the downtown branch or the central branch. That's usually the largest branch, or you can sometimes read through the various branches and see what one has the local history stuff. You can sometimes find it easily on their website, or at least find their phone number and give them a call and say, I'm looking for the local history stuff, I'm looking for directories, which branch of your library system would I find that? So one thing I usually do is I do a Google search. So somebody asked about Peoria before, so I can say, okay, I'm looking for libraries near Peoria, Illinois. That's what I put in Google. And then I can see the results. I can see right here is a cool little map of them. I can see, oh, there's a couple different branches. There's a downtown one. So that's probably the one I'm looking for, is this downtown library. So now I can see here's their phone number, here's their address. Usually it'll give you a link to that website. So now I can click on that, and now I can go browse and see, okay, is this branch the one that has the local history stuff? Sometimes they even have great stuff hidden under here. Like if I go to research and I click on genealogy, or I can see over here is a local history and genealogy area. Now I can see what resources they have, and it says, oh, it's on the lower level of the main library, and here's what they've got. Sometimes they even link really great digitized sources that they have through their website for this various areas. So again, wherever your ancestor lived, you're going to want to search for that library in that area that's going to have some of these resources. The Library of Congress also has a really great interactive map that's going to show what city directories are in existence from 1861 to 1960. So of course, not everything is going to be covered because that's not a complete coverage, but it's going to show you some holdings for the various city directories. So again, this is a link in your handout, and it's just going to bring you right to this map here. You're going to go into the map, and then you're going to find the various areas that you're trying to search. So I can zoom in. There's like a little timeline down here where you can click on the various years. So you can see in 1860, there's nothing that they're showing here. But if I click on 1900, now you can see, okay, there's numbers and there's, you know, if I zoom in a little further, I can see Appleton's right here. I can click on it and it's going to say there's 18 directories available for this area by 1900 or whatever this year I clicked on. And it's telling you to get more information on the various years. If you click this browse features area, then it's going to tell you, oh, there's an Appleton one for 1883, 84, 85, et cetera, et cetera. And then I can see, all right, if I click on a certain year, you know, this is what it is. And there's a library guide that's saying, you know, I would then follow up with the library and try to get a holding. It doesn't say, hey, it's actually at Appleton Public Library, or, oh, it's at Neenah Public Library, or whatever. You kind of have to use this information and then do the Google search like I showed you before to find the actual library in that area. Because sometimes it's not clear who owns this 1889 directory, if it's Appleton, or if, you know, Wisconsin Historical Society in Madison has a copy, or the Library of Congress obviously does, but who's going to get on a plane and fly to Washington, D.C. just for a couple city directories? Maybe if you have the ability to do that, great for you, but I don't. So again, this is a really great tool. You want to first click on those years, and then you can see as the years go on, there's more listings. So first click on the year and then zoom into that specific area where you're searching. I wanted to point out, if you scroll down on that first page before you click on the map, it tells you the city directories that they have are all on microfilm. So you do have to go visit the Library of Congress if you want to get access to all of these that are included in their map. They're arranged by city, not by state. They're in large cabinets. And then really down here, it says, we don't interlibrary loan these. So you can't just say, hey, I want this directory from the Library of Congress, send it to Appleton for me. Unfortunately, they don't do that. The staff at the Library of Congress will not search those directories for you, unfortunately. You can hire a researcher, usually for a fee, or sometimes you might be able to be lucky and find a volunteer who might find them for you. And it gives you a couple of links to people who research in that Washington, D.C. area, that if that's the only location that you can find that has a certain directory for a certain year and you've checked the local library and they don't have that year, for example, you may want to hire a researcher in that area. But I would always first check the local library because, like, for example, you saw all the Appleton listings. If somebody would call me who doesn't live in the Appleton area and say, hey, can you look up this name in this year of directory? I would say, absolutely. Whereas at the Library of Congress, they just don't have the ability to do that because they have so many requests like that they can't do that. But I would gladly look up city directories for people. Obviously, I can't spend all day, or I can't look through 50 years worth, but I can look through a few for you. They've also got a map for those crisscross directories. So again, those are kind of those ones that go by street and then the various houses. So they call them crisscross directories. So you can see all the various years, and just like that other map, it's interactive where you would select the year and then zoom into that specific area. This one covers a little bit different time period. So it covers 1930 to 2005. So this might be another way to find some of those between 1960 to 2005. There might be some crisscross directories that you can find then that they might have available. So now we're going to kind of dive into some of the online resources where you can find a lot of these directories, because thankfully a good amount are digitized and available on some of these genealogy websites. Unfortunately, there is no one website that has all of the digitized directories because that would be too easy, right? All of them have different collections. So you're going to want to browse through all of them depending on what time period you're looking for and what location you're looking for. There might be some overlapping coverage on certain sites, or there might be just one site that has, you know, the wealth of San Francisco ones that you're looking for, or the wealth of Appleton ones that you're looking for. Also be aware, of course, not everything's online, not every year is online. Like I showed you on Ancestry, they only have up to 1951 for Appleton. Well, we have up till this year in the library. So of course, if you're looking for a specific area, that local library is going to be the best place that's going to have the largest coverage. Of course, libraries, genealogy societies, historical societies, they might also have digitized some of their resources and might host them on their websites. So for example, we have what's called the University of Wisconsin Digital Collections, where we've digitized a few of our directories, and UW-Madison has hosted them on their website for us. So if you go to our UW Digital Collections, again, go to our website. If you click on eLibrary and go to our genealogy listings, this is going to give you a listing of all of our genealogy databases. And then if you scroll all the way down to University of Wisconsin Digital Collections, this is going to bring you into the Appleton Library local history collection, where we've got some city directories, we've got some plat maps, a couple other various resources are listed here. But you can see we've got some atlases, some historic sites inventory. Sometimes it's not always obvious, like this Morrow and Gillett, that's a city directory. So if you click on it, you can see what years it covers. And then right here is where I can be able to go into it. So now I could search within this. I can type in a specific name and search within it, and then it'll bring me to, okay, this is a page that has that last name on it. Now I can zoom into this page and see where they are on here. And again, see all the various listings. Or if I wanted to, I could go page to page, just like this, or just like that. If I find one that I want to save, this little arrow with the line underneath it, that's how I download it. They've got 3 different download options. I always recommend downloading the largest possible, because sometimes the really small ones are a little too small to read and they don't print out as nice. But we've got 4 different directories on here. So this is just one of the years that's included in here. There's also a spot. So this would link you right to all the Appleton ones in here. But if you go up here to where it says UWDC, there's all different kinds of ones, like from Neenah, from Manitowoc, all other areas in the state. So you can look at all the various collections that they have down here, or I can just search here with a keyword. I can put Neenah City Directory. Now I can see, oh, here's a 1931 Neenah Menasha one. I can click into it, and then I can search right here. And now I can see page that I want to look at, and then again, zoom in to be able to see, all right, here's my people I'm looking for. So there's kind of 2 different parts of the site. The first one, when you click on it through the library, is going to bring you just to the Appleton specific ones. If you want to get to all the other ones, you want to click on this link where it says UWDC in the top. I've also got a really great YouTube video. It's a short, like I think 10-minute one or less. It's linked in your handout, where it walks you through a little bit more about how to use the site, and kind of does that live demonstration I just did for you, essentially, to show you how to use that resource. We also have some really great statewide resources. So of course, other states also have really great resources. In Wisconsin, we have a site called Recollection Wisconsin. So you can just Google it or type in Recollection Wisconsin. It's of course linked in your handout. But this has resources from all around the state. So they've got city directories, they've got yearbooks, they've got oral history interviews, all kinds of great things. So again, you can just type in here. I can type in Neenah City Directory, for example. And again, sometimes it's linking to resources that you might know about. So this is linking to that same one in the UW Digital Collections. Sometimes it's linking to other things that, you know, maybe they've digitized and hosted on a different website, for example. So again, you can just click into it. And then it's bringing you into that UWDC site. Sometimes they will be within the Recollection Wisconsin site, sometimes not. So depends on kind of what you're searching. So you can see a bunch of different maps and things, other things that, you know, they've got some Sanborn maps, lots of really great resources other than city directories in here as well. So depending on what you're looking for, you can see there's almost 1,000 results just for Appleton alone. And again, other states might have similar resources. So I would Google around and say, you know, like Illinois local history resources or Iowa Genealogy Society, and see what kind of resources they would have. Of course, we already talked about this towards the beginning, but Ancestry.com or the Ancestry Library Edition is a really great resource. So of course, if you have an Ancestry subscription, you'd have access to it from home. If you don't, you can come into the library for free and use our library edition. It has the largest US collection for city directories. Again, I showed you that earlier from 1822 to 1995. Got coverage for all the states, at least some coverage, except for Alaska, unfortunately. They've got some international collections. So again, over 1,300 collections for US, for UK, Canada, Poland, Germany, Ireland, Australia, and more. Again, that number that's in the collection, so if you see that little number that you type in the bottom and I type in 100, it doesn't always correspond to, I'm looking at page 100 in the directory, because again, they're scanning it 2 pages at a time usually. So always double check that you're putting in a number and then seeing what the actual number is in the directory. Be aware, sometimes it's actually a county directory and not necessarily a city directory. So it might be listed under a specific city, but look at the first few pages to see, okay, is this a whole county directory or is it just a city one for a specific area? So for example, if you pull up Appleton, you pull up 1910, you see it's not just an Appleton directory, but it's a whole Outagamie County directory, and it features all the communities outside of Appleton as well. Heritage Quest, so that is going to look very similar and work very similar as Ancestry Library Edition, but this one's going to be free from home as long as you live in Wisconsin, or if you're outside of Wisconsin, for those virtual folks, check your local library. You might have access to it for free with your library. Unfortunately, on Heritage Quest, they only have US collections, and their directories is a little shortened from the Ancestry version. They only have 1822 to 1989. But if you want to look, they do have 2 international ones. They have 1 German one and 1 Switzerland one for some various reason. But how to get there is if once you go into Heritage Quest, you can either click on search to get there to find the various international ones or the other collections that they have. But if you know you're searching just for city directories, you can see right here at the top, they've got a link that's going to link you right into those city directories. And then, like I showed you earlier, you can just type in that keyword name of that ancestor, or you can find that state, you can find that city, and then that year that you're looking for. It's going to look and work exactly the same as how I showed you on Ancestry Library or on Ancestry. Just have to get there just a smidge different. So you'd asked earlier about some of the other sites. So Family Search does have some. It's a free site, of course, but you do need to have an account and be signed into that account to get the most of it. So essentially, there's kind of 3 places to search within Family Search for city directories. The first is you can go into the card catalog, you can type in a city or an area that you're looking for. Then they have various categories. They might have like church records or plat maps or things like that. You're going to find one that says directories, and then you can see what directories they might have. Unfortunately, some of them are going to be digitized, some of them are not. Some of them might only be physical copies that they might have in the library in Salt Lake City, which is the Family Search Library. There's a second part of the site that has some digitized books where they've got some great city directories digitized. And then they do have one big collection that's called United States City and Business Directories that goes from about 1749 to about 1990. They've also got a couple of German ones and a Switzerland one within all the various record collections in Family Search. I don't feel like this collection with the US ones is as robust and easy to use as Ancestry though. So I always start with Ancestry instead of Family Search. But of course, they're going to have some other directories that they might not have on Ancestry. So I can show you how to get to those 3 spots. So again, you're going to go to familysearch.org and you're going to want to sign in first. If you don't have an account, you would want to click create an account and then you'd sign in. So the first spot you're going to go is to click on search. And if as I mentioned, the first kind of option is to click on catalog. So this is where you'd put in that place. So I can type in Appleton, for example. And I select it on the list, and then I click search. And you can see there's various categories like church histories, church records, description. Here's one that says directories, and you can see there's a number 6 after it. So that means they have at least 6 directories related to this area. So if you click on the little arrow here, it's going to give you resources here. So you can click into them and see what is this. So this is an 1874 directory. This little format icon is going to tell you how you can access this. So you can see this is just a little roll. It means it's only available on microfilm at a family search center. So unfortunately, I can't look at this online unless I find it somewhere else online. But I can go back to my results and I can click on the next one and see, okay, is this one digitized at all? It doesn't look like it. So some of them don't have as much information down here like they should. I feel like some of these records are incomplete. So sometimes you're just going to find ones that, you know, you can't really search online. This one has a camera with a key on top. If I find that, that means it's essentially locked to me here. But if I click on that camera with the key on top, it says I can access this site at a family search center, which are kind of volunteer run places throughout the whole entire world, or I can access at an affiliate library. Well, thankfully for you guys, Appleton Public Library is an affiliate library. So that means you can come into the library and instead of showing all these non-photos, when you pull up this one in the library, it's going to show you all of those ones. Of course, for this one being an Outagamie County one, you're going to have the actual physical books in Appleton at the library. But you might come across this if you're searching for an Illinois one or an Indiana one, where you can access those records in an affiliate library. For those who don't live near us, or who you might want to search a family search center, where you see this in blue, you can click on it and then type in a various city or an area to see where the nearest one is. So if I type in Appleton, Wisconsin, it's going to show me all the various family search affiliates and family search centers that are around this area. And I can click on it and see, okay, there looks like a family search center on Park Ridge Ave. And if I click on more information, it's going to tell me, oh, they're open on Wednesdays or they're open Tuesdays for these certain areas. Here's a phone number I can call, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to give you that information on when they're open and how to access them. But that's just one part of the site that you can find some directories. So the other one is if you go back to search, and instead of going to catalog, you're going to want to click on books. So this is going to bring you into Family Search's digital library, where you can search basically anything. So I can type in city directory. Of course, I'd probably want to put in a specific city that I'm looking for, but just to show you as an example to get a result here, I'm going to put in city directory and see what pops up. So you can see right away, we've got a Madison city directory that's got a city and business directory for 1866. And I can click view inside, and now I'm going to be able to browse through this Madison city directory. And so I can zoom in, zoom out, I can rotate my pages, I can save the book, I can save a specific page, I can go page to page here, et cetera, et cetera. It's really great that you can also search within these books. So if you see up here in the top right corner, there's a little magnifying glass. So that's where I can type in a specific name. Sometimes it takes a minute to search for them, depending on how unique that name is, or obviously I put in Johnson to get a result. So here it's going to link me to what page. If I click on view, it's going to bring me right to that specific page where that name was found. Sometimes it takes a second to load it. So now here I can see where Johnson is. And it's going to highlight it right on that page for me so I can see where it is. And so again, I can zoom in and see a little bit easier, or up here in the right corner, I can also download either the whole entire book or just this one specific page. I can download it either as a PDF file or as a JPEG file, which is like an image file. So that's another spot where you can find city directories. And these are all going to be the digital ones for sure. So I would almost start here instead of in the catalog. Then the third area is if you go to search and click on records, You can either start typing in your ancestors' information and see all the various records you can get, or go down here where it says find a collection. This is where you're going to want to type in what you want to look for. So I'm going to type in United States directories, and I can see here's that United States city and business directories collection that I talked about. If I see this where it says how to use this collection, I always click on it before I even begin searching, because it's going to tell me what I might find in here. It might tell me specifics like what areas are included in here. So you can see right here, it just says these specific cities are included in here. So if I'm looking for something that's in Wisconsin or in Illinois or something else outside of these areas, I know not to even waste my time searching. So that's why you always want to look at this first before you try searching. I can go back here and then I can do that name search, for example. So let me type in Hamilton. And then I'm going to type in, I know Minneapolis was one of the results here, so I can type in Minneapolis and click search. Anytime you see this little camera, that means there's an image. So you can click on it to be brought into the image where that name is going to be featured. So here I can see is a directory for Minneapolis. Down here, you can see what year it is, where I, of course, could go to the first page in here, but now I can see, just like we looked at before, what the city directory looks like here and how it's all laid out very similar to the other examples we've looked at. Again, I can download a copy of it right here where it says download. Now it just saved a copy of it to my computer. Any questions about family search and finding the directories there? I said it's not as easy for me because like I feel like I would rather know more what's in here and what specific years, where like I showed you in Ancestry, you can select that state, then the city, and then the year, and I know what I'm looking at. Whereas here, I have to go into it before I know what I'm looking at, essentially. So I don't like that. I'd rather know what's in here instead of, I don't know if there's 100 directories in here or if there's 1,000. We don't know exactly what is in here, unfortunately. See if we've got any questions online here. How they gather the information in the city directories, I covered that earlier, or it is in the handout. UW Digital Collection is available from home. You don't even need a library card. You don't even need to live in Wisconsin. So you can access those anywhere in the world you are. Someone says, I believe MyHeritage is much easier to use in pulling up all the city directories instead of having to search each individually. So keep that in mind if you are a MyHeritage subscriber. So one of the other ones that you can use online is called Internet Archive. So again, this is a link in your handout. There's kind of two separate spots where you can search depending on what you're looking for. So I'll show you these examples. So first you want to select where it says metadata. So this is where you're going to search for a specific title or a specific subject. So this is where I'd put something like New York City Directory or Appleton City Directory or Crisscross Directory or whatever I want to search. There's an option below that that says text contents. If I want to search a specific person, or if I want to search within all of the things and not necessarily just a title or a subject, like I want to put my ancestor's name in here, that's the bubble I want to select when I'm doing a search, and then I can put in my ancestor's name. I always be sure to put quotation marks around whatever I'm searching because it knows then I want to search the specific name or that specific phrase instead of every instance of Jacob and every instance of Stilp. I want you to search that name together. So I'll show you live what that looks like. So right here, it's a little confusing because at first you might see this search box up here where it says Wayback Machine and you want to search in there. But Wayback Machine is actually archived web pages that no longer exist anymore. So you don't want to search in that one. You want to search in this second box down here. So when you click on it, this is where it gives you that metadata or that text contents option that I was just explaining. So if I'm on metadata, that's where I want to search that New York City directory, for example. And again, I want to put it in quotation marks so it knows to search that specific phrase. And then I can click go, and now I can see all these various city directories in New York that I can click on. I can click into it and see, oh, this is the 1945 one. And then if I want to search within this to see, hey, is my ancestor featured in here instead of going through all these 500 and some pages, there's a little magnifying glass in here where I can click, and then I can type in that last name and click enter. And then it's going to show me on specific pages where I can find that name. And then down here, I can zoom into that specific page and I can see there it is. Thankfully, it's going to highlight it for me. If I want to save a copy of this, if I scroll down here, it's given me a lot of different options down here. I usually personally download a PDF because I feel like that's easiest to open. But sometimes, depending on how large this file is, like if this is 400 and some pages, 500 pages, it's going to be kind of a bigger file. So you can also just choose to do a single page down here, for example. But that's how you would search for those things like those directories. And then you'd want to search within using this little magnifying glass. If you wanted to search everything in Internet Archive, because they have a lot more than just city directories, they've got newspapers, they've got just about everything you can think of. Again, go to the search box and then say you want to search your ancestor's name. Be sure to check that bubble below where it says search text contents, because then it's going to search within everything. That's where you're going to put your ancestor's name. So I'm going to type in Jacob Stilp, and I'm going to go. And now I can see, oh, there must be some sort of newspaper here. Oh, here's a history of Winnebago County where he is featured in here. So I can click on it, and then it's going to bring me right to that page. And now I can zoom in and see, oh, he's listed as one of the shoemakers and he has his business on Main Street. How cool. So that searches within it without me having to go, okay, let me see if there's a directory or a history of Winnebago County and then search within it. If you want to just search for your ancestor's name to see what magically might be out there, this is how you can find that sort of stuff. Any questions about using Internet Archive? All right. Library of Congress also has a telephone books collection. So again, telephone books are different than city directories, but if you're looking for your ancestor that had a phone, this is one of the links in your handout. You can see there are over 3,500 results. So just like when we looked at those Sanborn maps before, what I would do is I would narrow it down by a specific location or a specific date first, before I would, see what results there are. And then once you find a result that's like, hey, I want to click into this and look, you just click on that title. And then it's going to let you view all these images. And you can go page to page if you want to. And again, you can save these up here. So there's images or PDFs. And again, you can just click into these and browse to your heart's content and zoom in, zoom out, all that kind of fun stuff. They've got quite a large collection in here as well. The Library of Congress also has city directories. So there isn't like a ton, but there is a good amount. So if you go just to the main website of Library of Congress, so it's loc.gov, up here in this little search bar, make sure it's selected as everything. If you select one of these options, it's really going to narrow down what you're going to find. But I'm going to type in, for example, like Nashville city directory. And it's going to take its time here. So here we go. I can see right here is an 1865 Nashville directory. And again, just like I just did, I can go into it and then find this resource and then go page to page to browse through it. Fold 3 library edition. So we have that access available from home for free with your Appleton Public Library card. How to do this? They don't have a ton of city directories, but they do under the non-military area. So I'm just going to show you that quick. If you go to our website, go to Fold 3 Library Edition,
One where you have to have a library card.
you have to have an Appleton library card. If you have one from Little Chute or Kimberly, it will not work because Appleton pays for it. So only Appleton people can get it, unfortunately. So once you log in with your library card from home, what you want to do is you want to scroll down to where it says non-military. And you're going to want to see where it says publications. And then this is where I can start typing in anything I want. So I can type in directories and I can see, oh, there's Kansas City, there's Minneapolis, there's Pittsburgh, there's Toledo, et cetera, et cetera. And it's cool that you can see how complete this is. So it's really great when it says 100% complete. So again, you would just click into this and then browse and then be able to go into all the various pages in here or search within the pages up there. We're going to cover Fold 3 a lot more next month when we talk all about military records, because this is kind of our military record database, but they do have some non-military stuff like these city directories, which is really cool to access from home. There's also a site called Google Books. So again, this is where you could search for a specific title or a specific subject. So I could type in something like New York City Directory in Google Books. So this is a subset of Google where it's just going to give you book results. So it's books.google.com. And then I could type in New York City Directory. If I could type today. And then here I can see all these various resources that are digitized, and I can click into it and then be brought right into it. So go page to page and see all these cool things in this directory. So again, various coverage that they have in here. I can zoom in, zoom out, all this kind of great stuff. Down here, I can look at it 2 pages at a time or a bunch of pages at a time and browse through it that way. So that's a really interesting way. You can also search right down here for a specific name. So if I want to type in Johnson, and now it's going to show me what pages Johnson is featured in. And then I can click on it and then see all the listings for that name, for example. We've also got what's called Digital Public Library of America. So again, this is where you're going to want to search for that title or that specific subject that you're looking for, like Appleton City Directory. So this is going to essentially link you to other digital libraries around the world. So it's kind of compiling, instead of you having to search all the different libraries, you might want to start with Digital Public Library of America and then search like Appleton City Directory. And now you can see, hey, it's bringing you to our Wright's Appleton City Directory that's in that University of Wisconsin Digital Collection site that we looked at earlier. So you can go ahead and click into it. If you click View Full Item, it brings you right to that UW Digital Collections instead of you having to go through the other way. So this is a really helpful thing when you're not sure of all the different libraries that might have those directories digitized. Maybe start up Digital Public Library of America and search that way first. And then of course, whatever results you get, all those sites are going to look different. They're not all going to bring you to the UW Digital Collections depending on what you're searching for and what the library site looks like. We've also got what's called HathiTrust. So again, this is where you search a specific title or a specific subject. Be aware you might have some limited access to search for certain things or view certain things. So what they do is they have kind of a spot on their site that's available to anybody. And then they have a special spot of their site where you have to log in with a special partner ID. So for example, a lot of universities partner with this site. So me, I'm an alumni of UW-Madison, so I have a UW-Madison login where I can log into HathiTrust and get all this kind of hidden content that anybody who's not part of UW-Madison can't get access to, unfortunately. But they do have a lot of really great free resources for just anybody who doesn't log in. So again, right here at the top, you've got a search screen, you type in what you're looking for. So Seattle City Directory, for example. And now I can see, oh, here's an 1890, here's a 1901, and I can click into it and be brought into it. So sometimes it will let you search within, sometimes it will not. So if it will let you search within, there's an option over here that says search in this text. So I can type in that last name and click search. There's also a spot to download. So sometimes it will let you just download one page. Sometimes it will let you download the whole thing. It really depends on copyright status and if it's going to require you to log in or not. So here we go. We've got a result. Now I can click on that page and then it will bring me specifically to that page here. And so I can see it's highlighted right there. And I can, again, zoom in to read it a little easier. So right there it is. Sometimes when you zoom in, the highlight kind of moves. So you might need to search around a smidge before you find that name in there, but rest assured it is on that page. We've also got an online historical directories website. It's not complete, but they do have some US and some international links to various sites, which would have some city directories for you. So what you do is you come on over here, you can see there's some Canada ones, some Ireland ones, some UK ones, and then some US ones. So if you click on that, it's gonna then link you to all the various states. So then I can click California, for example, and then I can see, oh, there's all these different counties. Here's a couple different states, and then here's a bunch of different links for certain things. Sometimes it will tell you, oh, it's free. Sometimes you might see a $sign and that says, oh, Ancestry. That means I have to have an Ancestry subscription to look at this one, for example. So again, it's going to link you to a bunch of different resources here. The other site I really like to use is called the Ancestor Hunt. So this has listings by state and by Canadian provinces. So what you do is you go to the ancestorhunt.com. Up here where it says resources, they've got a bunch of different sub collections. So they've got newspaper links, they've got obituaries, yearbooks, alumni records, et cetera, et cetera. But you can see there is one that says directories. So that's what I'm looking for. Unfortunately, because it's a free site, you sometimes get those ads that pop up that you have to click in out of, but it's free. So you just do it. And then you scroll down because he's given you some information here. And then you can see all these various listings. So broken down by state, for example. I click into California, for example, and now I can see, if I keep scrolling down, all these various links. So now I can see these certain years that are collected. If you scroll down a little further, it usually will list specific areas. So now I can see, oh, if I'm looking for Almeda, for example, and not a whole statewide one, or if I'm looking for the county or all these other ones. So kind of look for that specific location that you're looking for, and it'll link you to where all of them are digitized. MyHeritage, somebody mentioned earlier, it's kind of easy to use that to find specifically what you're looking for. Unfortunately, you do need a subscription to access that. I do not have a subscription, so I cannot show you how it works. Same with Find My Past. That's another one that they have a lot of directories digitized, including a lot of like UK ones. So that one's more like a UK focused site. You do need a subscription to use that as well. And I do not have a subscription, so I cannot show you that one. I've got a couple of search tips for you. So if you are searching online, which is probably one of the main spots you're going to go to first when you're searching, I usually try to just search with a surname first, unless it's a super common name like Johnson or Smith, because many of the listings are going to be listed as last name first, then that first name. So I want to make sure I'm not missing out on a result if I'm typing in a full ancestor's name. If it's a common name, they might only list that name once and then list all of the other names. Like we looked at Ralph Hamilton earlier. So you can see all these little kind of ditto marks are listed here, and he's right up here. So, you know, sometimes that goofs up the search a little bit. That's why I sometimes will only search by the surname. Again, that first name might be abbreviated, so be careful. Yes.
Are there any specific areas that the appropriate way to search would be with the female's maiden name? Other than marriages, but I mean, do they ever go by just simply the maiden name?
So specific areas where you'd want to search the maiden. In city directories, not really, unless you're trying to find her family. Okay. I wouldn't search by the maiden name.
Okay.
Like we looked at before, we did see a maiden name in that farm directory. So if you know that a farm directory usually has that information, that might be a great spot to search it. But in a regular city directory, unless you're trying to find her siblings or her father or something, I wouldn't use a maiden name. I mean, you can if you want and see what results there are. It depends on how common it is too, and if you know her family is living in the area or not. Of course, as with everything online, indexing is not always 100%. It's not always going to be guaranteed that you're going to put in that last name and it's going to pop up with results. So that's why, in addition to searching or after I try searching, I'm going to still go to all those pages. I'm going to go to the alphabetical listing of all the Ks, for example, and I'm going to skim through them all really quick. It just takes an extra minute to make sure I didn't miss my ancestor in that directory. Especially if you think that they should be there and you didn't find them with that name search. I would definitely go page by page first to make sure before I move on to the next directory that, you know, that person I was looking for is not missed in that index. If you don't get any results from doing that keyword search of their name, again, go to that directory, go page to page. I can type in that number, for example, like I can type in 150 and see, am I close to the Ks or am I not close to the Ks? Or you can look, usually one of the first few pages, you're going to get that table of contents or that index that's going to tell you what specific page those alphabetical listings start on, for example. And again, that page in the database doesn't always match with the page in the book because they're usually scanned 2 at a time. So page 50 might actually be page 25 in the online scans, for example.
How do you address multiple spellings of surnames?
So just like any other search that you're doing, if you have multiple different misspellings, you're going to want to search all those different variations. Or like I mentioned, you can go into the alphabetical listing of all the Ks if your ancestor's name starts with K, and then read through all the Ks to make sure that name isn't spelled goofy in the directory. Yeah. We got questions before we move on to our last little section here. All right, we're going to talk about offline quick. So like I mentioned earlier, libraries are going to be your best bet for finding stuff online. Start at that main branch or that downtown branch or the central branch. You might find directories on microfilm, or they might be in those bound physical books yet, or you might get a mixture of both. Don't forget, in addition to those local libraries, you might get a regional library or a state library or a university library that are going to have directories like this. Or they might have different holdings than they do at the public library or that local library. They've also got genealogy libraries. So the Library of Congress, they have the largest city directory collection. Of course, that's in Washington, D.C. They've got that family history library in Salt Lake City, the Newberry Library in Chicago, a little closer to us in Appleton. They've got some great US and international directories as well. So there's going to be libraries all around that collect areas around them, or might collect directories from all around the whole entire country or even internationally. If you don't live near the library, some might do some lookups for you. You might be able to get them for free, or they might say, hey, it'd be great if you could give us a donation for this, because of course we're taking our time. If you're expecting us to look at 20 directories, that's, you know, time consuming. If you need some more extensive research, you might want to, you know, plan a research trip there if you can, or try and locate a volunteer who might live locally, or a paid researcher that you can hire to go research for you and look up those resources in that library, depending on how much work is involved or what your budget is, for example. I always kind of check with that local genealogy society too, because sometimes they have volunteers who are part of that society, or you can hire them on an hourly rate where they will go to the library and look at those resources for you for that hourly rate, for example. In addition to libraries, there's archives and museums. So locally, for example, we have UW Green Bay Area Research Center in Green Bay. So that's a really great archive that has a lot of this stuff in this Northeast Wisconsin area is housed there. We've also got the Appleton Historical Society Museum and Research Center that's in Appleton. They've got lots of great city directories and other resources that you would be able to access there as well. Again, there's historical societies, genealogy societies. So for example, we've got the Wisconsin Historical Society Library in Madison, or there's like the Ohio Genealogical Society Library in Ohio. So again, depending on where your ancestors are living and what resources you need for that specific geographic location, you might need to do a little digging to figure out what libraries or genealogy societies might exist in that area and what resources they would have within that society or that library. Some unfortunately do have to charge for their research. Again, they're volunteer run, they run on donations or memberships. Even if you're conducting research yourself, sometimes places will charge a research fee. Like I know, for example, the History Museum at the Castle in Appleton, they'll charge you if you come in there and do research, and you have to have an appointment in advance, things like that. So always before you go to research somewhere, you want to give them a call, figure out, is there a cost? Do I have to make an appointment? Things like that. Or again, they might offer that hourly research if you don't live in the area or can't go do the research yourself. So just to wrap up, I want to mention why you might want to use city directories in case I didn't make enough of a case of it during this whole presentation. Of course, the number one reason is they put your ancestor in a specific time in a specific place. Well, we talked about the census records a couple of months ago. Those are done pretty much every 10 years or every 5 years, depending on if it's a state or if it's a federal one. And remember, 1890, that one burned in a fire. Well, we can use city directories around that time period and in between those census years to make sure, is my ancestor still living in this place? Did they move around the city or the county or the state? Where are they living? When are they living? What's their occupation? Those additional details that you can find in these directories between those census years really help you make that timeline of where your ancestor is at a specific time. So knowing where they are or where they aren't are going to help you locate other records that are going to be available on them as well. So you might use a city directory to narrow down when your ancestor immigrated, or narrow down a specific death date for somebody, or find out when they moved or moved back to an area to figure out, okay, do I have records in all the areas that they lived in? Or, hey, they lived in Wausau for a couple of years. I should go check the Wausau records during this time period that they weren't living in Appleton, for example. They're going to give you more context on your ancestor. Again, that's going to lead you to some more potential resources or confirm that you have the right person. So it's going to list where they lived. Well, you can follow up with land records if they owned the land. If they rented or owned, some of those directories are going to list that. It's going to list where they worked or what their occupation is. Well, you can follow up then and see, okay, are there business records or employment records that I can find that my ancestor might be featured in? Who else is going to be living in that house with my ancestor? Are there relatives or friends that live with them? Of course, unfortunately, they don't list relationships in these directories. But people living in the same house with the same name, they're probably going to be related. Of course, you don't want to assume it's always a parent-child relationship, but at least you have a name. You can do some more additional digging in other resources to try to figure out what that relationship is or confirm what that relationship is. Directories are going to give you some context clues. So if you have somebody who is the same name person, like there's 100 John Stilps in my family tree, I can use the information from the city directories to figure out which John Stilp am I talking about. Is it the one who was a shoemaker or the one who was a cigar maker? The one who lived on this street or the one who lived on that street? So you can use that context information to pull people apart that have the same names and make sure that you're researching that right person. If you can't find your ancestor in a given census year and you have an address from that city directory, you might be able to find them in the census then using that address. So this really works well with cities, especially. The rural addresses, of course, are going to be harder because you're not getting that actual address. But I just did a video yesterday that I posted on our YouTube channel all about how to search in the census records using just an address. So I showed an example of how I found my ancestors in Chicago in 1900 when I had searched and searched and searched by their name and all the various misspellings of their name, and I hadn't found them. But finally, when I had that address of where I knew they lived in 1900, I was able to find them in the census record. So it's a quick 10-minute or less video that you can see how specifically to search in a census record by address. And of course, city directories, again, can give you clues on your ancestor, even if it doesn't list a date in there. Some of them do, which is really awesome. But sometimes you can see, okay, they're here one year and then not the next. Did they move or did they die? I can see the wife's listed here as a widow. Okay, well, that might be a clue that her husband died. Or again, sometimes they might have divorced. So you want to, dig a little bit deeper, but now you have a narrow time period of when to look. One really great thing about directories, it might be the only source of an ancestor if he or she was not registered to vote and did not own property. So renters, regardless of if they owned a property or not, are going to be listed in a city directory. Whereas, if they didn't own property, you're not going to find land records on them. If they weren't registered to vote, you're not going to find voting records on them, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a really great resource that you just have to live in an area to be included in the city directory. You don't have to have a telephone, for example. One really great thing is once you have that address, you can use that to see if the home's still standing. I can research the history of that house, see who else lived there, when it was built, all that kind of great stuff. I can learn about who else lived in the house, either before or after my ancestor. There's some great resources where you can even see, without leaving your house, what the area looks like. So what the house looks like, what the neighborhood looks like, if it's still standing. You may even get some interior photos on Google, which is really cool. So one of the resources is called Google Earth. So just earth.google.com. And you can type in a specific address. So like I typed in 451 Bartlett Street in San Francisco, where I know my grandma and her parents lived. And now I can see this whole area of the neighborhood and just what it looks like and kind of picture her living here. And you can see kind of on the tops of these buildings, that's where it's going to list the address. So this is going to give you a big overview. You can zoom in and zoom out as much as possible. And I can see, oh, look, there's a school over here. Maybe that's where she went to school, for example. Or, oh, there's a church or a hospital over here. And you can see what their neighborhood looks like and see this is what the back of the building looks like, for example, or this is what street parking looks like there. So you can kind of play around with that. There's also Google Maps Street View. So again, you can type in that address. And then this first result here is always Street View. You click on that, I can see now the front of the house. And again, I can look around the neighborhood a little bit and see all that stuff kind of that I can see in Google Earth, but usually just more on a personal kind of right in here. I can see zoom in, zoom out. And you can even look at other dates. So sometimes up here it says see more dates, like this one's from February of 2022. I can click on see more dates and then see all these other various dates that they might have listed here. So I can see, oh, this is what it looked like in 2007. And see, oh, look at the house was painted a different color or something happened, who knows? Maybe the house moved. Again, if I go back to these Google results, sometimes you can see interior photos. So I see right here is a Zillow listing. This is kind of a house service that they list houses for sale. I can see photos inside. And I actually showed my grandma this and she's like, it looks like the same cabinets as when I lived there. So, you can kind of see what it looks like. Even this is obviously more current photos, but you can kind of maybe picture what it looked like when your ancestors lived there. Beware though, again, some of those street names or those street numbers might have changed. So there's a link in your handout to the Steve Morse site where he lists some of those number changes and what year those happened. Or I always recommend calling that local library. I know if you call us at Appleton Public Library and you ask, hey, is there any time period in Appleton history that they change the street numbers or the street names? I hope almost all of my staff would say 1925 because I've drilled that in their heads. 1925 is the year to remember. So hopefully somebody at the library that you talk to is going to know or know somebody in the library that they can ask that knows that information off the top of their head. And again, of course, the house could have moved or could have been replaced. So you might need to do a little bit of digging to see, is this still the original house that was here in 1940? Or has it been replaced or has it been moved, for example? You can also learn more about what was in an area where your ancestor lived, use that to explore more records, give you more context about their lives, like who their neighbors were. What about that name of that witness that you keep seeing featured in that other genealogy record that you found? Well, look up that person in the city directory. Who are they? Do they live near my ancestor? Or, oh, it's the minister who married my ancestor. Let me look up and see. Oh, he's affiliated with this church. Now let me look at the church records for that church and see if I can find additional resources on my ancestor in that church. Again, businesses, schools, churches, clubs, organizations, all that stuff is going to be in these directories. So you can try to figure out what school did my ancestor attend, or here's the listing of all the churches that are in this area at this time period. And then I can look at the map, see which ones are closest to them for those possibilities, and then see if I'm able to find those records that exist for that area. Or I can see the names of the newspapers, the names of the cemeteries that are in existence during that certain time period, where I might want to follow up then and see, is my ancestor featured in that cemetery or featured in that newspaper, for example. There are a couple alternatives to directories. So if you can't find a directory for a certain year, or you're just not having any luck finding any digitized ones online, maybe there's going to be tax lists. So there are some resources for tax lists on Ancestry and on Family Search. Unfortunately, the majority of tax lists are going to be offline. So for example, for Wisconsin, almost all of ours are offline. If you're looking specifically for Outagamie County, where Appleton is, University of Wisconsin Green Bay's archives or the History Museum of the Castle have various years for Outagamie County where you can find your ancestors in those tax lists. There's also voter records. Of course, your ancestor would have had to be somebody who wanted to vote and voted. So you can find a lot of voter registration records. Some are online on Ancestry or Family Search, or you can try Google, or some of those other free or subscription-based genealogy sites we've talked about. Again, a good chunk of them are going to be offline though. So you might have to go to a county courthouse or a state archive or some sort of genealogy or historical society that would have kept them. Or maybe they're going to be buried within the county court books and not be indexed. And you might need to do a little digging to find those records. I always recommend starting at the Family Search Wiki because some states have a voting records section within their wiki. So for example, within the wiki, you can type in a specific state name like South Carolina and then type in voting records, and it will show you, hey, there's this voter registration cards for this certain time period on Family Search. And then it tells you a little bit of history sometimes or what you might be able to find in those records. So again, you can use Family Search Wiki for any state, any country. So I can type in Illinois voting records. And now I can see here's some for Chicago, for example, on Ancestry. And here's a little voting rights history, for example. So again, this is a good place to start to link you to where to go for more information. There's also those state and federal censuses. So again, a couple months ago, we talked about the censuses, how various states conducted them at various years. Again, check that Family Search Wiki to see those resources. The federal ones, of course, are going to be every 10 years, beginning in 1790 up to current. But of course, the ones that we can access as genealogists is only up to 1950. And then 1891 is mostly destroyed. Refer back to our census talk that we did back in March. Again, we've got that recording up on YouTube where you can watch that and refresh your brain. Or if you missed it, you can watch that. If you need the handout, go ahead and send me an email. I'm happy to email it to you. And of course, we've got newspapers. We just talked about newspapers, was it 2 months ago? I can't remember now. Again, refer back to that talk. So we've got that talk on YouTube as well. As more and more get digitized, again, they can help you pinpoint where your ancestor is in a specific time, in a specific place, give you more context clues about their life. And sometimes they even list an address, or I will even search in newspapers that specific address for my ancestor and see what other information I can find about that address. Maybe who lived there before, who lived there after, things like that. That's what I've got for you. Next month, we're going to be talking all about military records on July 23rd. In the meantime, on July 11th, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have our next Find Your Ancestors session. It's going to be all about researching your ancestors' community involvement. So we're going to be talking about those social clubs, those civic clubs, and what records you might be able to find for your ancestor if they volunteered or were involved in one of those community organizations. That you're going to want to learn a little bit more to see what records exist and how you can find them. That's what I've got for you. Thanks for hanging in here. As usual, I'm over time.
That's the right address in here for the newspaper thing at the end. It says utu.be.
So that's a link for YouTube. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
that's how YouTube does their links.
Period.
Yeah. So you can always just go to APL, go to youtube.com/APLREF. That's our main YouTube channel. So I can show you how to do that quick. And then go within that playlist. So youtube.com/APLREF. And then you can see under playlists,
Okay.
We've got the genealogy series for seniors. So if you click on that, that's going to show you all the videos that we've done since then. You click on whatever one you want to search on and watch.
In the historical society is actually in the castle.
So for Appleton, we have the castle is technically the Allegheny County Historical
Right.
Society. And then we have a specific Appleton Historical Society. That's not part of the castle. Right now they're on Durkee Street, but they just purchased, the Sitzman Law Office building on Franklin Street. So they'll be moving there within the next few months.
Is that the old Mongolian barbecue?
Yes, the Old Mongolian Barbecue. Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, so they're working on it right now and gonna be moving there soon.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that was the actual name.
Any questions for my online folks here quick? Thanks everyone for joining us. I don't see any other questions, so look for the recording of this. I should post it later today. And then you'll get an email from Zoom with a link to this recording. So take care, everyone.